Hey physics students, welcome to Rapid Review for Honors Physics. Today we're going to talk about trigonometry. I recommend you just skip this entirely unless you need a review of trig. Usually in my class I'll do a quick 5-minute thing of reminding everyone what we know about trig. I'll do that here now for you. These are the elements of trig that you need to know for solving problems in a physics class. First of all, what's trig? Oh, it's all about right angles. You know this. I often label them A, B, C. I'll label the corners with uppercase letters. I'll remind you that my quirky handwriting might look unfamiliar to you, but now you have the secret decoder there on the left side. Okay, so trig tells you the relationship between sides and angles of a triangle, and if you already had a geometry class, you already know the Pythagorean theorem, and you're partway into being able to relate sides of triangles. Soon you're going to be adding angles through trigonometry. So Pythagorean theorem I would use to solve relationships between the sides, and then for everything else I would use trigonometry. And I say I can solve just about anything. If I know any two, I can find everything else. There's one little asterisk. I'll let you figure out what that is if you haven't already thought about it. Okay, so the relationships in trig just tell you the relationships between the lengths of two sides of a triangle. So for example, if you want to relate side A to side C to get angle A, you can use trigonometry and discover that A is 30 degrees in this example. But how do we know that? How do we know? How do we know? Well, your calculator knows. Because if you take the length of side A, divide by the length of side C, all you need to know is that that is the same as the sine of A. It's just a definition of what sine means, S-I-N, which by the way is an abbreviation for S-I-N-E, 3 letters instead of 4. So here in this picture, it looks like I found out that 0.5 is the sine of 30 degrees. And how do we know? I say kind of with a wink, your calculator knows, and that's how you know. You can effectively think about it as your calculator is keeping a lookup table, and there's a little person inside there that reports back to you when you ask a question, just looks up the answer. There's more to it. There are ways to mathematically derive sine and cosine and tangent functions. That would be way beyond the scope of this, like how does your calculator do that? But suffice it to say your calculator's trustworthy, and as long as you know how to use your calculator, you'll get the correct answer. Which leads us to how to use your calculator. I gave an example here in class. I don't think I need to do it here in this review presentation. I will say be careful about radians and degrees on your calculator. Make sure you know how to use your calculator for solving trig questions, answering trig questions. You might want to practice that a little bit. You probably are now comfortable with the names of the sides. If we're talking about an angle theta, then the opposite side is just what you think it is. It's the one that's opposite theta. Or the adjacent side, remember adjacent means nearby, so it would be this side. No big deal. And of course the long one is called the hypotenuse. Okay? Be careful. If I had arbitrarily decided this was theta, then this would be the adjacent side, right? So realize that adjacent and opposite are relevant relative to where you drew your theta. Okay, so you might hear somebody say, sine of theta is opposite over hypotenuse. Now you know what that means. And there are other trig functions, which I presume by now you are familiar with, their definitions. And there are inverse trig functions that are used if you want to find theta, right? So you would use the corresponding inverse trig function to solve for theta in a problem. In physics problems, you will frequently be using sine of theta, you'll be frequently using cosine of theta, and you'll be frequently using inverse tangents. you'll discover. You'll need to know all of the functions, but sine, cosine, tangent, inverse sine, inverse cosine, inverse tangent are plenty. We don't ever get into secants. It's not necessary. Okay? So a couple bits of handy knowledge too. You'll ultimately memorize some common angles like 45 degrees and 30 degrees. I put their sines and cosines here for you in case you want to memorize them on purpose. That's all we've got for today. More on physics problems coming up in our next episode.